So I, like everyone, I think, want to know a bit more about the NB Housing Corp. And I know you've answered some questions, but I'm wondering, can you dig into the specific services that are coming over from social development? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, my understanding is you're just asking about the social development piece that's moving over. So I'll start there and you can take me deeper if you'd like. How's that sound? So through social development, we have rental assistance programs, and there's different ways those happen, property management, and repair and renovations could be for landlords that have affordable housing units, or maybe homeowners that have lower incomes, those programs do that. So that's kind of the three buckets of the funding that would come over from social development into the Housing Corporation.
Thank you to the minister. Through the chair, could you repeat that second one? I got rental assistance, I got repair and renovation. Can you quickly repeat that?
Management.
Okay. Thank you to the minister through the chair. Okay. And as I said, I think we're all trying to understand what the NB Housing Corporation is going to look like and is going to be doing. Could you speak to whether the NB Housing Corporation will be working through a lens of housing, affordable housing as a human right, and with a housing first approach?
Through the chair to the member opposite. So as we are going down the pathway to what the New Brunswick Housing Corporation is responsible for and what social development is responsible for, the simplest way we've found to represent it to ourselves as we're making decisions over the next few months as we're working this through is that social development's relationship is with the clients. So they are the organization that has the boots on the ground that deal with the individuals that need their various services they have. The Housing Corporation is responsible for the bricks and mortar piece of the housing continuum. And, you know, with a lens towards every New Brunswicker should have a safe and affordable place to live. And that's the lens we use when social development is looking at the clients and we're looking at the bricks and mortar. So that's a really good high-level way to think about how the distribution of responsibilities will be between the two.
Thank you. Through the chair to the minister. I would have to agree with the minister that every New Brunswicker deserves a safe and affordable place to live. And so I would like to see that happen. And I guess I wonder, in terms of concrete goals towards making that happen, like, for example, we know that there's about 8,700 people on the affordable housing wait list for NB housing. We know that the bilateral agreement's going to create around 1,200, 1,300 units, not all of them new, some of them just with supplements, and so they already exist. It's not new housing on the market. Can the minister speak to how we're going to get there to achieve that goal of everyone having safe and affordable housing? Because at the rate we're going, it's hard to see that happening. Thank you.
The chair to the member opposite, that's, we're working through the process right now of a housing strategy for New Brunswickers. That is the overriding goal, is to have a vision to what that looks like and what we need to do and the changes we need to make and the gaps we need to fill to make that happen. And part of the strategy is how are we going to measure ourselves against getting to that goal? One of the things I've talked about in an ongoing basis around the housing corporation and housing and this particular file is this is not a problem that government can solve by itself. It just is not possible that the government can solve this by itself. And that's why the work we're doing now to build the strategy and engaging all the stakeholders that are involved in the housing spectrum here in New Brunswick is to see how we can engage with these different stakeholders so that we all have a part to play in, the overriding goal is safe and affordable place for every New Brunswicker to live. And what can we as a government do to make the environment within New Brunswick to make that happen. And there's all kinds of different ways we can do that. There are other ways other jurisdictions have made changes and done things to make that happen, and all of that needs to come together in the housing strategy in June with some real concrete changes, some real concrete measurable goals as well, so that we can look in a year and see, are we making these targets? Are we advancing, the housing file to the betterment of all New Brunswickers? And I will say too that this is not something that we're going to fix in that first year. We need to put the changes in place with a vision down the road. I think we have measurable goals in succession out there to see us get to eventually what our definition of is for success on the housing file. And I guess I'm excited to see what that would look like. I'm excited about the changes and also knowing that it's not just government that has to lift this load, and also knowing that where we are now has been decades in the making, so we need to be realistic about what we're able to do going down the road as well.
Thank you, through the chair, to the minister. I would agree, this has been decades in the making. The federal and provincial governments really backed away from housing for a long time, and took too long to get back to it, I would argue. Considering the current conditions and the fact that this government first denied that there was a housing crisis, then studied it, then waited a while, brought in a rent cap because they decided that they listened and decided the conditions were right for it. The conditions didn't change, but took away the rent cap. But we're in a waiting period of waiting for a strategy. The minister just said we won't really see results in the short term. Why not keep a rent cap as a protection given the current conditions in order to help protect tenants and keep them housed at least in the meantime?
Through the chair to the member opposite, I would challenge the member opposite on saying this government hasn't done anything, because we've done a lot to try to change what's happening within the housing landscape in New Brunswick. And if you'd like me to, I will list off all the different things. There have been successive changes over a number of years. Like it started with the housing strategy and social development in 2019 with goals and plans in place. Of course, COVID hit, things changed slightly, but in 2020 we did the 90-day rental review with some recommendations in there, some quick hits of things we needed to do. There have been successive multiple changes with the Residential Tenancies Act, and there's also been changes in the Assessment Act to try to encourage development. So there's been many different mechanisms and changes have occurred to try to improve the housing landscape in New Brunswick. The housing, a minister responsible for housing, the renewed New Brunswick Housing Corporation and the housing strategy are all pieces of this puzzle that we're putting together to change what is currently happening in the housing environment here in New Brunswick. And, part of the strategy is to take what has happened and changes going forward and measure the changes that they're producing and make adjustments along the way if necessary. So it actually have realistic goals that we work towards meeting, and if we're not meeting those goals, then we must adjust. So there are many things that have happened. The rent cap is just one piece of the puzzle, and there are many other things that have happened, and we are currently watching what is happening within that landscape and continue to do that on an ongoing basis, and we'll make more changes if necessary, and some of them may be dictated by the final housing strategy that's produced in June as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I did mention that the government did bring in the housing cap. I wasn't saying that the government had done nothing. They did the housing or the rent cap, which was great. But then the government got rid of it, and I didn't ask for a list. I know what's happened. I asked why not, since the conditions didn't change, keep the rent cap, and so I don't know if I will get an answer to that, because it's been hard to figure out exactly which criteria have been measured there. The rent cap protected a lot of people, and those people are no longer protected. I guess I will go back to a previous statement that the minister made talking about measuring success. I would ask, how would the minister measure success when it comes to housing? And I'd love to know some short-term milestones, but ultimately, yeah, how will the minister be measuring success?
Through the chair to the member opposite. So the housing strategy will be released in June. That will have all the criteria around it. There's many that we are considering to have included with the housing strategy, but nothing has been settled yet, because that would be presupposing all the answers before we actually have our housing summit at the beginning of May, and I'm not going to do that. I want to wait till the outcome of the housing summit and that the issues that are brought forward there and the solutions we can find to address that, and the innovative solutions that are presented by our stakeholders at the housing strategy. So that will all be included within the housing strategy. The highest level of data that's used is obviously the vacancy rate, which is produced by Canada Mortgage and Housing, but that certainly is not that will not be the criteria that we're measuring ourselves going against moving forward. It'll just be a piece of the puzzle, and you're going to be included in all those discussions on what those criteria are. So I can't presuppose the answer before we get there.
Thank you, through the chair. I want to move on to another question, and given that many questions have been asked, I'm going to ask about pieces of things. So something that has concerned me is the test results for radon gas in public housing, and of course this is an issue that can affect people who are not in NB housing, but we know that the AG report several years ago showed high levels in many of the places that have been tested, and at that time the Auditor General said at that rate social development was going to be taking 23 years for testing. Just about a month ago the minister said at the rate that she said it sounded like 6 years. Now it's sounding like a year. what has changed and why wasn't this possible sooner?
Through the chair to the member opposite, there are some challenges that are anticipated related to being able to do the remediation of the anticipated possible level of contamination, although it's unknown. And so at the rate we did the testing this year, it would have been 6 years to have the testing completed. And the philosophy has changed that we are going to test as many as we possibly can in the next winter season, and we will cross the next bridge when we get to that. So we'll see how big of a problem we have in our public housing units, and we will address the challenges related to getting the remediation completed within the Canadian guidelines. And so the philosophy's changed.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. I'm glad the philosophy has changed, and so to be clear, it sounds like the philosophy was previously we'd rather not know because then we'd have to deal with it. We're not sure if we can deal with it quickly enough, and so I'm concerned by that. Again, I'm glad it's changed, but that meant that there were people living with radon gas in their units. And not knowing about it just for lack of will then. So that's not a question, I guess. Here's a quick one. How many new staff will there be at the Residential Tenancies Tribunal?
Through the chair to the member opposite, at this point, none.
I have to say, when I read and listened to the budget speech, and it said, given the increased volume of inquiries to the RTT, our government will invest $1 million to increase resources to keep up with demand, I pictured there being more staff. I'm curious that there won't be. I'd like to know how that's justified given the increase in demand cited by the government. And so it turns out that $1 million is not. What I understood about the $1 million basically going to the RTT to increase resources is not directly what's happening. It sounds like there's software Service New Brunswick will have that, and that's where the $1 million is going. Will that software be able to create a rental registry?
To the member opposite. So the devil's always a little bit in the details. There were 2 individuals added to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal late in the year, so that, and I think you were in here when we were talking about it, so there's $200,000 extra within the Residential Tenancies Tribunal budget. So the legislation doesn't currently require a rental registry, but we are going out with an RFP for software solutions, so we're looking for an off-the-shelf software solution for the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. So I don't know if the new software solution will have that capability or not. It's possible. It certainly is. Part of the impact of the new software for the Residential Tenancies Tribunal is also making employees more efficient with their work and data collection and all the information we need for decision making. So it allows people within the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to do their job more effectively and efficiently as well. So it's a mixture of all the different things that you kind of were talking about.
Thank you to the Minister through the Chair. So will the ability for the software to create a rental registry be in the RFP?
The chair to the member opposite, we're developing the requirements right now. You certainly could put that request forward if you would like, and we could consider that. And I don't know exactly what is encompassed with the off-the-shelf solutions that we would be using, so it's hard to tell you.
Thank you to the Minister through the Chair. Well, I certainly would encourage that to be part of it, and that would, I guess my question is to the Minister, is that something that the government is looking at, to create a rental registry in New Brunswick? And I would encourage that, and if so, I would recommend that it be part of your software to make things easier.
The member opposite, maybe I can ask you some for clarification. What exactly do you consider a rental registry, and what information are you talking about being included within it?
Well, I'm sure that there's a bit of a variation depending on the jurisdiction, but it would track all of the rentals in the province. I also would like to know whether you're considering short-term rental registry, and that would be for, you know, an example would be the Airbnbs, the Verbo, those things.
The chair to the member opposite. So these are, neither of those things are included in current legislation, to be clear about that. And, you know, of course, everything is on the table currently because we're in the middle of developing the housing corporation and the housing strategy, and so those things will be under consideration as we're putting together the housing strategy and considering what the benefit is of both of those things to New Brunswick, New Brunswickers, and, you know, our various government entities as well. So I would say it's on the table and no decision has been made.
Okay, well, thank you to the Minister through the Chair. I am glad to hear that a rental registry is on the table. I think that that's important, and we see more and more jurisdictions looking at it. And then a short-term rental registry, also important. I guess connected to that, I wanted to ask, does the Minister have a sense of how many short-term rentals there are currently in the province?
We do not have that information and have no way of having that information. That's not within our jurisdiction currently.
Thank you to the Minister through the Chair. I guess we need that short-term rental registry, and then we will have that information. I want to move on to ask a few questions about the bilateral agreement, the 10-year agreement. Part of it requires some repairs to units, and so I was wondering to date, and this is using the language in the agreement that I think should be changed, but how many urban native housing units have been repaired, and where are they, and how much has been spent on that so far? Thank you.
So through the chair to the member opposite, we spend approximately $3.5 million annually on our rural housing units. There's 797 of that particular type of unit, And those funds go toward repairs, renovations, modernization. So it could be anything from repairing a roof to add new doors and windows, new insulation. We're on track to hit our targets in the bilateral agreement, but I will say that we are working hard to exceed those targets using provincial dollars, a bigger provincial contribution to get the work done that needs to be done on those units.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. Can you speak to this year's fiscal plan and speak to geographically where these investments and repairs are to be made? I'm curious whether the repairs are sort of happening one at a time all over the province, and just geographically where will this investment be focused this year? Thank you.
Through the chair. So our budget, again, this year is $3.5 million. These type of units, the units within this category tend to be single-family homes or duplexes. There's a few triplexes, but not very many. Based on the distribution of number of units, we would allocate the funding out proportionally to the different regions in the province. To give you the number of units in each region, I don't have that information readily available in front of me, but we do proportion those dollars out to the regions proportionally for the number of units they have in each of their regions so that the money can be spent there. And as I said, we prioritize repairs first.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. Another piece of the agreement is around extending operating agreements with nonprofits and cooperatives. So I'm wondering how many operating agreements with nonprofits and cooperatives have been renewed, and have any conditions been added with this renewal? And can you speak to the plan going forward with this sector? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, you've asked a question that has a lot of detail in the answer. So I'll start, and you might want to, I don't know, let's start, and then maybe we can continue on. So the long-term operating agreements are signed with the nonprofit and co-op housing projects. The agreements are generally 25 to 50 years in length, and they're signed with either us or the federal government, but many of them are now expiring. And so there's a total of 5,168 housing units that would be in the housing affordable portfolio. Some have had their operating agreements expire, so there's been 192 operating agreements that have expired as of the end of December of 2022. So of those 5,168 units, 2,909 of the units are no longer under agreement. So that does not mean that they're no longer part of the affordable housing program, though. Some of them were extending the agreements, some of them were changing the agreements, and many of them are continuing to operate without agreements, still meeting the conditions of the program. And we're ensuring that because we continue to monitor them to be sure that they are managed appropriately and that they're meeting the requirements of the rental amounts and whatnot. But at some point, if there's a shortfall in repairs or maintenance of those units, then the province would step in to assist them with any of the major repairs. And so it's kind of a cooperative relationship back and forth with these co-ops and not-for-profits to make sure we both succeed. We have the affordable units and they are able to manage them and take care of them in the way they need to. But there are some of these agreements that have expired or we are renegotiating because of just the time frame, because they're usually set up to expire when their mortgages expire.
Was that all right? Okay.
Thank you, through the chair, to the minister. So 192 of these agreements have expired, of a total of, I don't know how many. We know how many units. I'm not sure how many agreements there were. If the minister could provide that answer. And I guess, is it important to the minister and the government to renew these agreements quickly?
Through the chair to the member opposite, I don't have the total number of agreements right at my fingertips, but I can tell you the units that are covered and not covered, if that will help, or do you specifically want agreements?
I guess I was trying to figure out 192 expired agreements out of how many. So if the minister could provide that to the committee at a later time, then that would be appreciated. I wanted to ask about one more topic before my time expires. I'm wondering under which circumstances the province is allowed to sell its public housing units.
The chair to the member opposite, I got your numbers for you. We waited just long enough. So there's currently 389 agreements in place, and then there's the 192 expired. So you asked me a question about disposal of new public housing units. It would be very rare that we would even contemplate needing to dispose of a public housing unit. Not completely unheard of, but very rare. It would be at a point where the property was beyond repair or there was no need. So it was over time demonstrated that there was no need, no individuals that required public housing that would relocate to this area where the public housing unit exists. Then we may contemplate it, but it would be extremely rare that that would happen, and there would the number of criteria around even contemplating that.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. It's hard to imagine there being no need, and given that the government would be the landlord, then the government would have let the place get into disrepair. So when the minister says it's extremely rare, can she quantify that? Through the chair to the member opposite. So
maybe I'll paint that picture a little bit further. So contemplate a unit damaged by fire. No one on the waiting list, nobody been on the waiting list willing to relocate to that area for a significant period of time, or the unit's sat empty for so long it's continually vandalized, all the copper wire's been stolen out of it. So those are some of the instances that, when I'm talking beyond repair, that it could be from situations beyond our control, which would be vandalism, that kind of thing. And so there were, in the most recent board meeting, in the last, in the fall, there were 3 such units that were identified for disposal.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. I mean, where I live, you know, often in sort of rural areas, people know which units are NB housing houses or units or whatever, and I've had people ask me, oh, well, I'd like to go live in that one, and then social development said, oh, well, we're selling it. Anyway, I'm wondering who decides and who's going to decide if those get sold. Is it social development? Is it the NB Housing Corporation, and where does the money from these sales go?
The chair to the member opposite is the board of directors' responsibility to make that decision. In its current state, the New Brunswick Housing Corporation is within the Department of Social Development. It's being moved out to its own entity. The board is going to be more of an external board with the new housing corporation, and they would have the responsibility to make that decision going forward.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. And from looking into this, it seems like between May 2021 to May 2022, about 18 public housing units were sold. And so I wouldn't categorize that as extremely rare. I guess I just, it concerns me to know that there's people needing affordable housing, and the NB Housing has been disposing of units. And so I'm wondering, where does the money go from sale of public housing units?
Through the chair to the member opposite, the revenue for the New Brunswick Housing Corporation comes from general revenue, and therefore the disposal of any property would go back into general revenue. Going forward, disposal of the property would go back into the housing corporation or the Crown Corporation going forward.
Thank you to the minister through the chair. I am running out of those minutes, and so I guess I want to just say, you know, thank you to the minister and her team for answering my questions here today at Estimates. I do encourage the minister. I know this is a unique situation where there's not a Department of Housing where everything's new, but the idea of everyone having safe and affordable housing in New Brunswick is a great goal, and so I encourage the minister to be ambitious with that. Everyone deserves that now, and we're far from that, but the decisions that are made in this budget and in the coming months will determine how quickly people get housed. And so I would just push for really ambitious goals.